Hey, this is just a quick note about our sponsor, Privado, the premier enterprise privacy platform, purpose-built to bridge the gap between privacy and engineering. Its privacy code scanning solution embeds privacy compliance and governance into the product development lifecycle and empowers privacy and security teams with unparalleled visibility of sensitive data flows and the insights to find and fix privacy vulnerabilities. You can leverage Privado's data flows, dynamic data mapping, privacy assessment automation, and real-time visibility of privacy issues. Enter the era of proactive privacy and transform privacy from business blocker to business enabler. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Hello, I am Deborah J. Farber. Welcome to the Shifting Privacy Left podcast, where we talk about embedding privacy by design and default into the engineering function to prevent privacy harms to humans and to prevent dystopia. Each week, we'll bring you unique discussions with global privacy technologists and innovators working at the bleeding edge of privacy research and emerging technologies, standards, business models, and ecosystems. On today's episode, we welcome Dave Burnett, VP of Strategy at ZeroBiometrics, a company who's invented a privacy-preserving way to use facial biometrics for easy authentication to devices and experiences. Dave has led multiple leadership roles at notable companies like Fingerprint Cards, Indicative, Identity Devices, Knock Knock Labs, the FIDO Alliance, Symantec, and PGP Corporation. In today's episode, we'll discuss key challenges as we evolve from mobile biometrics to many other use cases, technical and policy differences that affect privacy, how industry leaders like Apple have approached facial and fingerprint biometrics, how ZeroFace authenticates you without knowing what you look like at all, almost like magic. We'll learn how addressing privacy usability challenges in the crypto space are shaping up. We'll discuss ZeroBiometrics' impressive metrics for false acceptance rates and false rejection rates. And lastly, we'll talk about ZeroFace's QR code and the capability for this technology to radically change the way we travel, ship goods, and authenticate to our devices. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, everyone, to Shifting Privacy Left. I'm your host and resident privacy guru, Deborah J. Farber. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my next guest, David Burnett, identity, biometrics, and security leader, and VP of strategy at ZeroBiometrics, to discuss his team's major innovation in the biometric space. Hello, David. Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's a delight to be here, and I'm happy to talk with you about privacy and, of course, about biometrics and some of the innovations that we're bringing to the market.
Awesome. It's a really interesting space. I know I've worked in biometrics a little bit. Back when I was at Visa, I was on their public policy team there, and biometric authentication was even a paper I was working on. So I have a lot of interest in this space, but I also know how complex it can be, where there's biometric enrollment, for instance, is really much more difficult than the authentication piece. Like, who's the authority on who declares your biometrics are? My biometrics are Deborah Farber's biometrics, right? So like that initial enrollment is usually, done by like a trusted authority of some sort, like a government or, something else. But how would you want to present, I guess, this topic of biometrics? Like, how would you give an overview of biometrics work that you're doing for the uninitiated?
Sure. Like you, I've been in and around the biometric space for quite a long period of time, even long before the days that biometrics were common on our cell phones. And the good news for all of your listeners, and frankly, whenever we as industry professionals talk about biometrics, is that everyone today pretty much understands the experience of using biometrics because they're on all our phones. That's how we unlock our phones and protect a variety of data that we use online. And some of our banks use the biometrics that are on our phone to authenticate us. So that's great that people understand the experience. But it's important to understand a little bit more of how they work, because there's a sea change that's starting to happen in the biometric space, where more and more biometric authentication is not happening on our devices. They're happening on back-end servers that don't have the same levels of security, privacy, and control that our mobile devices have. So let's start with just some basics about the biometrics under the hood, if you will. And I'll keep this simplified, and I'm just going to focus on kind of what we would call world visible biometrics, the things that you can see about someone, their eyes, their face, or their fingerprints. There are other biometric technologies that get into things like your blood vein patterns or how you walk or the way you type on your keyboard. Those are interesting, but they're not really the types of technology that are that have the same kinds of privacy considerations or concerns. So for any type of world visible biometric, they all work in a very similar way. You start with taking a picture of what is going to be your biometric identifier. It could be your face, it could be your finger, it could be your palm shape, it could be your iris. It varies based off of what's called a modality, the biometric modality. That's stored in a registration event, or some call it an enrollment event. That picture is saved, usually in some sort of a digitized form, not a raw picture that we can see, but some format that's easily interpretable and processable by the computer. And then when you come back at a later time to verify that you are you, then another picture is taken and it's compared to the first picture. And that creates a probabilistic match with some sort of a confidence that your registration image, again, eyes, finger, face, match the verification image that you take at a later point in time. Now, I said something that isn't precisely true, and a lot of people don't even fully understand this, but it's a very important point. I didn't mention identity in what I just said. I said, you are you, right? It's verifying that you are you, but all the computer's really doing is just verifying that it took a picture of something and then compared it at a later time, and those two things match. So when your phone verifies you with biometrics, finger or face, that's all it's doing. Any sort of linkage to your identity is happening separately. But the data that is used is actually quite sensitive, because especially it's easiest to understand it with face, but it applies to finger, it applies to eyes as well. That data is you, right? That's personally identifying information. And that's part of why our phones have so much hardware-based security in them in order to protect that data. You don't want to lose that data. It's sensitive. You only have one face. You only have one set of fingers. These are sensitive things if they get lost. And that's one of the key challenges as we shift from mobile phone-centric biometrics to ever-increasing use of biometrics elsewhere, whether it's server-side or whether it's for a time and attendance machine or any number of other use cases. We don't necessarily have some of those security guarantees when you go beyond the mobile phone.
That's fascinating that there's such a distinction between on the mobile phone versus other use cases. And could you unpack a little bit about why there's a privacy challenge to surmount when it comes to, maybe server side or like you said, the time and attendance type of applications?
Absolutely. This is a very detailed topic, but to summarize it, there's a set of technical differences, and then there are, I would call them almost policy or user differences that both have implications on privacy. So in the simplest scenario, right, your mobile phone has secure hardware on it. Generally speaking, the more reputable big brand mobile phone manufacturers talk about the security model that they implement to keep your biometric data safe on your device. But if you're using something else, you don't know what that technical infrastructure is like. Let's say a time and attendance machine. It's not uncommon to use face or fingerprint for recognition on time and attendance machines. You have no idea what the security architecture is, and you don't even really have a way of verifying that you've provided consent for your biometrics to be used in that particular way. Now, consent is a policy issue. It's a legal issue. And in the United States, we don't have consistent laws, unlike the European Union and some other countries. We don't have consistent laws across all the states about requiring that you obtain consent from the person before your biometric data is used. But there are definitely public policy considerations that come into play there, as well as the security considerations that come into play, because you don't know what that security architecture is like. And then on top of that, you've got a different risk profile because you don't know what could possibly happen or what the use is going to be beyond that one device that you might register with.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, loyal listeners. The Shifting Privacy Left podcast is seeking sponsors who want to help educate our growing community of privacy engineers. Position your brand in front of privacy engineers, architects, developers, researchers, and privacy tech buyers. Insert a 30 to 60 second ad like this one into every published episode of the podcast. This is dynamic content after all. Feature your new product, an upcoming conference, a sponsored special deal, endless opportunities. Email sponsorship@shiftingprivacyleft.com for more information on our sponsorship package. Okay, let's get back to our engaging privacy conversation. So how would you say that the people who are building in the identity biometrics space are approaching from a threat model perspective? Like, how are they approaching biometrics in some of these new tech settings? So whether it's, for the metaverse or in the Web3 space or just traditional, anything besides mobile. Obviously, we know how people are doing it with mobile phones, or actually, no, maybe that's a really good place to start. Apple is considered to be almost a gold standard when it comes to biometrics. How would you describe how they deployed a privacy by design architecture before we dive deeper into, ZeroBiometrics approach?
Sure. So Apple is well regarded for privacy, and they have been consistently with their mobile devices on the bleeding edge of privacy designs. And in fact, their biometric architecture hasn't yet, at least, suffered from any security breaches, which is actually different than some of the other device manufacturers that have had security breaches, where information that should be kept private, whether it's your biometrics or your private keys for cryptographic operations, have been potentially subject to compromise. So Apple's architecture is pretty straightforward. But before I get into that, I think it's important to keep in mind that Apple, like every other phone manufacturer, is dealing with this classic historical architecture that I described around how biometrics work. Take a picture, save it, take another picture in the future, compare the pictures, right? And yes, it's digitized in some various formats, and what the picture is changes. Like Apple uses infrared light, and then they use an infrared dot projector on your face to get a 3D representation of your face. But fundamentally, it's still the same technology. And why this is important is because this architecture is actually really old, right? If you go back to when biometric search was first invented back in the 1960s, especially for face searches, it was done on computers. There was a huge room for one computer. There was no internet. Security just meant physical security. There wasn't a concept of networking and network devices and adversarial attacks, except for someone breaking into the building physically itself. So there's been a huge design challenge that persists all the way through to today. And there aren't too many things in our digital world that haven't changed pretty fundamentally over the course of 60 years. I mean, there are very few pieces of tech that are 60 years old at all that we're using today, much less something that goes back at a fundamental design level to such a long period of time ago. Which doesn't mean that there hasn't been innovation in how biometrics work or the accuracy, right? There's been huge advancements in the accuracy and different modalities and different types, but they all still rely upon this fundamental model that inherently is saving personal information about you. Now, Apple, being Apple, they set a very high standard for how this subsystem in their phones and their tablets work. And for their implementation, it doesn't really matter whether it's face or finger, it's the same basic technical architecture. They have a subsystem and literally a dedicated chip. They call it a secure enclave, but that's just a fancy branding term for what's known as a secure element in the industry. And this is a dedicated microprocessor that's different from the thing that runs your phone and makes your phone calls and cruises the web. It's dedicated, isolated from the rest of the operating system. It actually is tamper resistant. So if someone opened up the phone and tried to decap the secure element, it would break and it would destroy the data. So it's isolated. That's one of the security things that they do. They have controlled interfaces for accessing it, and they don't allow the data to be copied out. So data goes in to the secure enclave. It can be compared within the secure enclave, but they've designed it so that it can't go out. That's the high level from an architecture level, but they've done something else, which is also really valuable, which is they've published security white papers about how their architecture works. And they've made that publicly available for third parties to review and to understand the implementation and the design. And that's just a good security practice. And it shows that the level of seriousness that they take in building out their phone architecture.
That makes sense. So I think that there's also something else that's missing. The idea that we've got local processing and edge computing that enables it to be really fast, but because it's stored locally on your phone as consumers, as individual humans that are end users for this technology, it's kind of really nice that we know that we have this in our possession and that Apple does not have access to the data that's put in there. Would you agree with that statement?
I do. It is really useful. And the unfortunate thing, though, is that in order to take this old architecture and make it safe, the Apple and other phone manufacturers have come up with similar designs, sometimes using secure elements, sometimes not. But the data goes in, but it can't come out. What that means is that if you have two devices, let's say an iPhone and an iPad, you have to register your biometrics twice, that's an acceptable compromise, but it's still a usability trade-off. And that's the issue, right? Whenever any sort of biometric technology is used, there's always a historical trade-off between privacy and usability. And every vendor and every company makes those trade-off decisions. Apple's pretty public about what those trade-offs are. Not every other company is as public as Apple is about what their trade-offs have been.
That's probably why they've earned so much trust, even though they're very aggressive with their advertising and tracking around that. But yet, because of Apple's architectural stance and transparency with the public around a lot of other things, especially around the hardware, it's amazing how much goodwill that has helped them build with the public and thus a lot of trust. One of the most trusted companies out there, I'd say. But that said, can you tell us how is the expanding use of biometrics creating new privacy and security risks?
Well, so it starts with a desire for convenience, first and foremost, right? And, we've all gotten used to the experience of biometrics on our devices. And so there's a desire, whether it's a service provider or whether it's a hardware manufacturer, to extend that same kind of biometric convenience to other experiences other than just your phone. So you're starting to see, for instance, more and more door locks that have fingerprint sensors on them. I recently booked a hotel for a weekend vacation, and it was a very interesting scenario where part of what they wanted me to do was to verify my identity as part of the booking process. So I literally had to take a picture, let my web camera take a picture of my face as part of the booking process, and then hold up my driver's license to the web camera so that they could take a picture of my driver's license and then compare the face on the ID photo to my face. And you're also seeing that kind of model happening with systems like the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States. And it's just becoming more and more pervasive because the experience can be so heavily streamlined and then easy, especially if otherwise you'd have to create a name and a password and these other kinds of high friction experiences, that we are seeing biometrics expand outward. Again, though, it's an old model. It's fundamentally insecure because it's saving personally identifying information. And we don't have the same level of transparency and trust that every manufacturer or every company that's using biometrics is actually using them in a safe and responsible way from a security or even a public policy perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think of most recent example for me is, trying to play around in the crypto space and signing up for a Web3 crypto wallet or even a self-sovereign identity wallet. Right now you have to remember 24 words or put them somewhere. It's very secretive set of words, right? Or you don't have to use the words. It could be the long token itself. But I could see that. I know it's more of a security issue because you want to make sure that you can have access to your own account in the future. But you also don't want someone else to have access to it, making it partly a privacy challenge in that it's not easy to use. It's not very usable when you have maybe many wallets in different places, different organizations. You have many wallets. You're starting to have different relationships with different companies where they each want a login in a certain way. And you're like, how many 24-word passcodes can I possibly have before I forget all of them and lose some of them and don't have access to my assets? So I really see this as being a challenge now because, for the KYC, the know your customer laws, I'm seeing exchanges require the same type of scenario that you're talking about. Show us all this different identification. We're going to capture it in pictures and, document it for compliance. And while I'm not personally against KYC, it is adding a lot of friction and it is not very usable. I mean, it's preventing a lot of people from even getting into the crypto space to begin with. So I guess the question is, what do we do about it? What is ZeroBiometrics doing? Because I know you're about to tell us, but it definitely sounds like magic. So we'll demystify. I'm hoping to demystify for the audience that it's not magic. It's well designed, that it appears magical.
Right. Well, and our iPhones seemed magical when they first shipped, right? When the iPhone 1 shipped and we were all used to mobile phones that just had a keypad on them, or maybe, a BlackBerry or, a Palm that had a cell phone inside of it. Anytime you have a big shift in technology, the new experience can seem magical. So thinking about all of these challenges that we'd experienced in our respective careers in biometrics, because I've been in the industry for quite a long time, and as have others that are part of the core ZeroBiometrics team. We looked at a lot of these challenges that we've talked about, whether it's the existing model, how do you protect the biometric information? How do you trust that the user of the technology that you provide isn't making some mistakes in how they're deploying the technology that then create security exposure? We came to the conclusion that we needed to approach biometric authentication using a clean sheet design. The existing model that we've talked about, Apple's done a great job of putting a security boundary around it. That model is just too fraught with risk. There's just too many technical challenges with making that model secure, especially at scale. And when I say scale, I don't mean scale in terms of the number of devices. I mean the number of people that are deploying the technology. Apple's one customer deploying biometrics effectively to their customers. You start talking about many banks, or you talked about multiple digital wallets, all looking at deploying some form of biometric technology. You get into real scaling issues, especially on the security side. And it would be important for your audience to be aware, if it wasn't completely clear, that the folks that sell the biometric technology, the raw biometric technology, they're not security folks, right? They don't think about or have any security considerations at all, right? What they're doing is they're selling you a tool, and it works, and it needs security boundaries around it to be safe. They focus on that the technology works and is accurate. They have no exposure or knowledge about how to make it safe, generally speaking. That's up to the company that deploys it. Apple happens to know how to make technology safe. Therefore, their implementation is good. They also invented Face ID, using a variety of different technologies so that it was easier for them to make it safe. But they didn't invent fingerprint sensors. They had to figure out how to make fingerprint sensors safe, and then they just adapted that security model. So if I'm a bank, or I'm making a door lock, or if I'm making a time and attendance machine, or if I'm the hotel chain that I described earlier where I had to verify my face, you have to figure out how to use the technology in a safe way. And especially if you're deploying it inside of your company or inside of your product.
That makes, a lot of sense to me. I hadn't really thought about that at an industry level, that a lot of the salespeople are, they're not necessarily security and privacy folks, they're salespeople. They might be talking about security, but it's really about maybe the limitations or capabilities of the product. But in reality, they are not threat modeling for the use case of the specific deployment. And that's what's so important, that companies that are buying solutions that understand how to threat model for privacy as well. So fascinating.
To be very clear, right? And you're hitting the nail on the head, right? The folks that sell the biometric technology focus on accuracy, right? And security through accuracy. And yes, we're this level, it takes, you need to have a population of this size before you would find a potentially matching fingerprint or iris or face. And the numbers.
A false match.
Yeah, false accept or false match are the terms that are most commonly used. And different modalities have different accuracy levels or different false accept and false reject rates. But that's what they compete on, right? That's not the security of the product, of the bigger product that they're a component part of. That's not their problem. That's out of scope for what most biometric companies do. And having sold fingerprint sensors, for instance, into some early door locks that were being made, because that whole trend really kind of started in Asia and is only now really starting to come to the United States. I was astonished at how many door locks were being made with literally no security hardware inside them whatsoever. Your templates, your biometric data, just stored in the raw. Anyone who opened up the lock could put some probes onto the chip and copy the data right off that corresponded to your fingerprints. So it's not a theoretical problem. It's a very real problem, especially as you look to scale up and scale up and scale up. So we decided we can't use the existing model. There's a need to do a fundamental shift in the design to focus on privacy, to focus on scalability, meaning that many companies can use the technology. It needs to have a lot of security principles embedded in the product. We need to make it hard for companies to make mistakes and somehow compromise your data. So we had these very fundamental design goals in designing the technology that we now call ZeroBiometrics and the product ZeroFace that we have commercially available today. And what we did was to design a system that doesn't know what you look like at all. It saves no information about what you look like in order to authenticate you. And that may be the magic part that you're referring to.
That's the magic part. That's the part that's like,
yes,
it just works. So please, demystify us, because, I know there's going to be a lot of feedback after this episode or maybe even requests to demo the product, because it seems like it solves so many problems that it can't possibly be the magic we're all hoping for. But it seems like it is to me. I've kicked the tires a bit, and I really, I'm excited for you to kind of tell us a little bit more.
I'm happy to. So the most important thing for your listeners to be aware of is that what we have brought to market, yes, we have our own innovation and some proprietary technology that we've built, but we're standing on the shoulders of giants with our technology. And the core concepts that we use in our solution are well understood in computer science in general. Let's start with something very simple. How can we recognize your face without knowing what you look like? The answer boils down to a concept called a zero-knowledge proof. And a zero-knowledge proof is a fancy term, and it's often given an acronym of a ZKP, zero-knowledge proof. What that does is it's a way of me asserting that something is true to you without me having to reveal the confidential information that I have. So it's saying, I am me, or my face, this is who I am, without actually revealing what my face looks like. There's a lot of interesting videos about this on YouTube. There's some great science articles about it. There's folks much more learned than I am that can speak very eloquently to this. But basically, the way we work is that we use your face as the secret for the zero-knowledge proof. And what we save is the mathematical formula that can be used to verify that your face is actually used. So zero knowledge proofs ultimately wind up doing some form of computation. We do a form of computation. And as long as we actually generate the right result based off of what we see, then it's you. But let's go into a little bit more detail here, because there's a very important concept that's one level down from how the technology works. So traditional biometrics, I know we've covered this a couple of times, but takes a look at your face, saves a picture. We do something very different. We look at your face and we identify these interesting points on your face that have biometric information. Where are they located? It could be the corners of your eyes, or it could be your mouth, or it could be your eyebrows. There's a lot of what we call entropy or data that we can recover when we look at a face. We don't record any of what we see, but we do record what are the most distinctive places to look for information about your face. And that we inject into our core formula and create essentially a customized zero knowledge proof for your face. And the result is what's called in cryptography it's called a hash. What we actually use, ultimately, we use SHA-256, which is a very well-known and highly trusted hashing algorithm, to do a one-way conversion into a result, a 250-bit string that describes the correct result if this formula is applied to my face, my zero knowledge proof for my face. And if my face is registered, the zero knowledge proof for my face is different, Deborah, than if we take our product ZeroFace and point it at your face. And in both scenarios, if I take your formula and apply it to my face, I'll get a hash, but I'm not going to get the correct hash result that describes me, or that is the result of this analysis and this computational process that is unique for my face. So every person that gets exposed to ZeroFace has a unique hash value that is generated, and we match literally by comparing an original hash versus the resulting hash, the enrollment or registration hash versus the verification hash.
So are you saying that you're able to use biometrics to authenticate someone to a crypto wallet without, replacing completely like BIP39, the 12 or 24 words?
Yes.
Wow. And you're able to deploy this on what else? Where are some other, I don't want to say use cases, but what are some other technologies you can interface with to enable the biometric authentication?
Yes, we absolutely can verify your face is the face that we've seen without saving any information about your face. And that hash value that we generate can then be used to perform a variety of cryptographic operations as a seed into various cryptographic functions. You mentioned one of them, for instance, BIP39, which is the technology that's used for generating 12 words or 24 word recovery seeds for wallets, or root seeds for wallets. And the way we work in that scenario is that we can take our hash, if we know what the right answer is for the seed, what is the seed for a wallet, we can regenerate and transform kind of the root hash that we generate from your face into the actual BIP39 hash. This is a very complicated way of saying, if you forget the password to your wallet, you don't have to remember the 12 words or find the 12 or 24 words. You just scan your face to recover your wallet, right? Or you just use your face to authenticate into your wallet. But there's something else that we can do, and I'll give you a wallet example, and we can talk about other scenarios. So cryptographic wallets use private keys in order to sign different transactions. In a cryptocurrency scenario, you might be transferring money from person A to person B. In a distributed ledger scenario, you might be approving a transaction or signing an event that says a smart contract, for instance. You might be signing a smart contract to demonstrate that you agree to the terms of that contract. What's happening in both of those cases is that you are using cryptographic operations where the proof that you are you is possession of secret data. In this case, what's called a private key, a value that only you are supposed to have access to perform these signing operations. Now, Apple when you do different types of key operations, to go back to that gold standard. When you generate private keys, these secret keys on an iPhone, those are saved in the same security architecture that saves your face data. And in cryptocurrency use cases in particular, loss of those keys, it's highly risky. You've got to keep those keys safe. There have been instances of keys being stolen and money being transferred, because if they've got that secret data, that signing key, then they can go out and conduct transactions, and it's impossible for someone to tell that it wasn't me that approved those transactions. Well, there's an important thing that we do here around signing keys as well. So that upends the security model as much as ZeroBiometrics and ZeroFace upends it on the biometric side. Every time we see your face, we can reliably generate the exact same hash value. We can use that to create signing keys. Well, that means that you no longer need to save those signing keys when they're not being used. That's the old model, right? You create these keys, you save them, you put them in some sort of secure, trusted device. And then when you log back in using a long password, then you can sign transactions. Why do it that way anymore, right? We know it's you. We see your face, we've verified it, and we've got the hash that is unique to you. So then go generate your signing key dynamically, recreating it. So every single time you log in, we can make those signing keys available again, reconstituting them out of thin air, essentially, or really reconstituting them from your face. And then you can go right ahead. And this is probably clear, but this is a super huge change, right? Your keys don't exist when you're not logged in. They just don't exist anywhere in the world. They can't be stolen because they don't exist. And frankly,
it just blows my mind.
Yeah, and you can't be subject to a subpoena and be forced to turn over your private keys because they don't exist.
So that's a challenge right now, where if you use your biometrics on your iPhone, for instance, the law basically says, the Supreme Court says that it is, in the public domain, your face and your biometrics. So you can be forced to use your face to open up your phone for a search at the border, for instance. But here in this instance, it seems like there'd be a good argument that, your keys don't exist when they're not in use. So
that's right. They don't exist.
You can't provide them.
And, for personal devices, even in the United States, the laws are different at border crossings than they are when you're physically inside inside of the territory, yes. Right? You have very few rights at the border, even as an American citizen. Once you're in the country, you have different rights. And frankly, courts are split on whether you can be compelled to provide a biometric as part of under court order. Certainly, you can't be forced to provide a PIN or a password.
Right. The something is not necessarily considered in public, but your face is, yes. Unless, so the argument goes, you're not securing that, right?
Even your finger, right? So, the courts split, but generally, and this is part of why on phones, things time out, so if you haven't used Face ID or Touch ID in a certain amount of time, you have to default back to PIN to keep your data more safe. And of course, we support PIN as well for those kinds of security considerations. But the important thing, and the really interesting thing again, is keep in mind, security is shifting away from, and authentication shifting away just from our phones. More and more devices and more services are adopting biometrics to create more seamless user experiences. So if they've got keys that they've created to represent or to protect your data, well, then they're in possession of those keys, whether those keys are on a door lock or whether they're on a bank server or what have you. When you're using ZeroFace, it doesn't have to work that way. They don't have to store keys to protect your data. They can get the key from you when you're authenticated to unlock your data, as opposed to the other way around. So a service provider wouldn't even be able to respond to a subpoena without actually the user being present to regenerate those keys. So that's one of the privacy issues that we have. And it's not just around biometrics, it's around system security in general, right? Okay, maybe my phone is private and harder to get access to, but the courts can, or all sorts of scenarios where people can go to service providers to subpoena or to get access to your private data. Or let's set aside government or use cases. Let's talk about hackers that can break into bank systems or IT systems at any number of companies to get access to sensitive data. Well, we can not only get rid of all the biometric sensitive data, we can make sure that that company has no keys that encrypt your personal data on their service. So even if they break into their network, if a hacker breaks into their network, they might steal some encrypted files, but the company that they stole your data from, that was holding your data in trust, they don't even have the keys. So it's two paradigm shifts for the price of one with our technology, right? One, we completely get rid of the personally identifying information, the security risks around storing face information. We also add revocable features, revocability of your face data, all sorts of other very interesting modern things. Like we make it possible for you to expire your biometric after a certain amount of time so that it has to be refreshed. So you might give a bank, for instance, permission to use your biometrics for a year or for a month, some set period of time, and know that everything blows up and that they're not able to use it past the point in time that you permission that use, that custodial use of your biometric data.
Well, that's really great, giving you power to be able to choose when your data is used or not, and have the power to revoke it is just key, especially with GDPR being exported around the world and having more rights, and the trends out there where everything's becoming more decentralized and humans having more ability to control their own data because it's living on their own devices.
Yes. Or even if it's in a cloud service, that's part of why we talk as much about the security aspects of our product as the biometric aspects. Because today, let's say if you're using some cloud company to save your documents up in the cloud, it could be Dropbox, it could be Google, it could be any one of a number of vendors, right? They're responsible for protecting your data, right? Well, we can shift that focus of control back to you by saying, no, the way your data is protected is with keys that are derived from your face that they don't get to have access to, that don't even exist when you're not there. So we really offer not just a biometric solution that doesn't know what you look like, right? So a big change there on the privacy side, but we also have a radical change on the security side by not requiring keys to be saved. And that has massive implications for cloud services, as well as, crypto wallets and other Web3, digital ledger, hash graph sorts of use cases.
It's honestly so innovative. So we're talking biometrics. What are your metrics for false positives? Because that's, like you were saying before, everyone is always competing over who has the best authentication based on these metrics. And so I guess typically do companies state their false positive metrics are, and then what are ZeroBiometrics?
Sure. There's two terms that are commonly used to describe biometric system performance. One is a measure of accuracy, and it's called the false acceptance rate. How likely is the system to confuse Deborah for Dave? Right. And usually that's expressed as a ratio. The likelihood in a large population of people finding someone that looks like me is a ratio of, you have to have a certain size of population before you're going to find someone else that looks enough like me that it might trick the system. And different biometric modalities all kind of operate within different kind of expected performance ranges. So with finger, there's one chance in usually 50,000, sometimes it's as much as 100,000 people that might have a matching fingerprint or close enough that it would trick or fool the system.
That's considered like a high bar. Like, a good biometric is 1 out of 100,000 people, 1 out of 50,000 people false positive. Okay.
Yes. And in fact, you know how we use 4-digit pins on our ATM cards here in the United States? That's roughly equivalent to, I mean, depending upon, it's usually about 1 over 10,000 is what that's considered to be. Sometimes a little bit higher. It just depends upon how you do the math, but that's the rough metric. So 1 in 50,000 or 100,000, that's the range for fingerprint. For face, it used to be much lower, right? You rewind 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and it was far lower quality, which is why, frankly, fingerprints came to our phones first before face, right? Because the image recognition, face recognition, the AI engines, all the various models that were historically used in that old model of making face recognition work were just not very good. Now face has gotten pretty decent, and it's usually around, the normal measurement is around 1 in a million. There's one company that has gotten much higher to about 1 in 125 million. But because we did this complete clean sheet design, we got a leapfrog in performance. And this often happens when you do clean sheet design, where you get that kind of a leapfrog. In the testing that we did with the Australian Science Agency, kind of the US's equivalent to NIST, their agency is called CSIRO. Our performance was 1 in a billion. And that means you'd have to have a population of 1 billion people before you would find someone with a similar enough of a face to mine or to yours or to anyone else's to create a false match.
That's just insanely impressive. Part of why I said it feels like magic, what you've created here. But obviously, you've got the bona fides and all the details to back up the technology claims.
But it's a crazy number.
It's a crazy number.
It is a crazy, crazy number. And, and I don't want to soft pedal it because it was a deep research exercise that we did with that agency. And they didn't just measure performance. They actually went in to validate the science claims. Like the statement that I made earlier that we don't know what you look like. That's a statement, the idea that we're not saving information that describes your face. That's something that was actually validated by their deep review of our tech, right? So it's not just performance, they were assessing science behind what we were doing as well. But it's still a crazy number, right? It's still a crazy, crazy number. And I'm used to getting that reaction when I talk with folks in the industry, their colleagues or customers. There's a lot of, how can you possibly do that? But I've yet to have anyone, no matter how deep they've dug into the technology, to find a fatal flaw or error. We scrubbed that particular research really carefully before we went public with it, for obvious reasons.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I know you've told me in the past, too, that you were very skeptical of these claims yourself, having been in the identity security space for so long. And then when you kicked the tires and looked under the hood, it sounded like you were just as impressed as I am now. Yeah.
Your listeners would probably find this interesting, right? I mean, it's one thing. I mean, if this invention had come out of Google or Apple, we would kind of believe it on the surface, right? Because of massive R&D budgets and deep science and millions of, well, not millions, but tens of thousands of PhDs working in the trenches day and night. But it was a little company that came out of Singapore that brought this technology to market. And so I was quite skeptical, being a kind of a grizzled old veteran in the identity and biometric space. At first, I was just skeptical is the polite word for it. And I spent a fair amount of time talking with the CTO, but more importantly, doing adjacent research. And just like there's plenty of information out there about zero-knowledge proofs and how they work, and I could see the conceptual application to biometrics, there's been quite a bit of research published by various academic researchers that talk about the core concepts that are somewhat different in our implementation. There's unique IP, certainly, in what we're doing, but the concepts have been studied and explored in depth since the early 2000s. In many ways, what we are is the first implementation of a new model for doing biometrics. And I'm sure there will be many other companies in the future that adopt models similar to ours. So we're on the bleeding edge, but we're the first of many to come, because the privacy issues that we face and the expansion of biometrics is unstoppable. at this point. So there's security risks are too significant. The privacy issues are too significant. The legislation is happening too fast. We can't stay with this old model. It's like saying, no, I still want to drive a mule-powered wagon when the rest of us are, getting in jet planes. So we're the first jet plane, right? We're the first maker of the first jet plane. There will be many others. And I think, in some period of time, it might take 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, you won't find the existing model of biometrics being used anymore. There's just too many problems with it.
Wow, thank you for going through unpacking all of that. What are some of the interesting use cases that this new technology can really help with? I mean, I've gone to your website, so I'm just going to list them out now, just because we only have so much time left. So we've got authentication, identification verification, safe biometric portability and account recovery, which we talked a little bit about before, QR code authentication, and biometric encryption. There's a whole bunch of scenarios, but I really love that QR code authentication example that you've used in the past with me. Can you talk about kind of the airport luggage tag scenario?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's my favorite pet use case to talk about, not because we have any intention of building this product, but because solving this problem is not possible with traditional biometrics, at least not in a safe way, and certainly not in a way that's fully anonymized and privacy preserving. Especially pre-pandemic, I was on flights all the time. Right. I was, rarely was I at home for more than a couple of weeks before I'd be back on the road. And while I was fortunate that I never had a piece of baggage stolen, it's surprising both in the US and globally, just the lack of security, around your luggage. It's easy, even though in theory, it's a secure space at airports. It's super easy for anyone to just walk up, look like a passenger and just grab a bag and, roll it off, from the carousel. So it's an interesting problem that you're not going to solve by throwing bodies at the problem. It doesn't happen often enough that it's going to be solved by throwing people at it, not even in low-cost parts of the world where labor is fairly cheap or free or close to free. And frankly, what's lost usually isn't valuable enough that it's inconvenient, but it's not like you've got $5,000 or $10,000 worth of stuff in that luggage. And even if you were dumb enough to put that much valuable stuff in there, that's your fault, right? Is the way the whole model is designed. But if you want to solve that problem, that's where we can do some very interesting things with ZeroFace, because we break those two paradigms. We don't have to worry about the security of your biometric information, and then we don't have to worry about any of the key data or anything else. So because we're not saving biometric information about you, we do have to save that zero knowledge proof that I mentioned earlier, and we save it in this file called a zero map. That zero map file, it's not directly readable or processable. You can't look inside of it and make any sense out of it. And besides, we wrap it up in security layers. We AES encrypt it, and we have all sorts of integrity checks inside the file itself, which, by the way, is very different. Going back to traditional biometrics, you just get a raw set of biometric data that they save or that's saved by the system. And again, you have to put security around it. So this is an example of something that we've done differently. Our zero map files are inherently encrypted, and they have internal checksums. And there's internal encryption beyond the outer. I mean, it's a layered set of defenses around the data, even though that data doesn't contain any biometric information about you. We still make it safe. So by making it safe, right, we enable a couple of things, right? We can copy your zero map file to any device that you want to use, right? You can copy it from your PC to your phone, or from your phone to your tablet. Like the challenge with existing biometrics is you have to enroll in different places. That's not true with ZeroFace. You enroll once, and then you can push your zero map file to any place that you want it to be, including your baggage tag. And one of the things that you can do is take a version of your zero map and encode it in a QR, in a 2D barcode, a QR code, and provide it to your airline. And then they can print that on your baggage tag. And even though the file is encrypted and protected, if someone managed somehow to break the outer layer, we have internal flags here to restrict the usage of the tag. So for instance, we can say that this QR code, this version of your zero map, it's only good for 48 hours. So you give this tag, you give the QR code to your airline the evening before you fly. It's good for 48 hours. After that, it can't be used anywhere. And then you can also geocode it. Say, okay, it's only going to be good at my departure airport and my destination airport. So when you arrive, you can take your bag off the carousel, and your baggage tag has all the information now that's needed to do that zero knowledge proof for your face. It doesn't have any information about you. The QR code doesn't know that it's Dave. It's just, here's a face. Here's a zero knowledge proof for somebody's face. I don't know whose face it is, but here's the zero knowledge proof. Then you can walk up to a little turnstile with gates and present the QR code. The machine can scan it, then scan your face, compare the resulting hashes. And if it's you, then the gate opens, and then you are allowed through. Or frankly, you could just put it on a mobile phone, because if you just have a random check, like one security officer doing a random check using a mobile phone, then you can deter a lot of theft. Or even, let's say, if they, you wanted to, one of the things that is not uncommon, especially out of European airports, is to do a certain amount of checking to make sure that the ticket holder, before you board, they usually grab a couple of people and say, let me check to see, let me see your passport, let me see your ticket, and let me see your carry-on luggage. And then they cross-check all of those things. Well, here, you could just do it very quickly. Let me scan the tag that's on your luggage, and let me scan your face really quickly. And then boom, yeah, it's you. You've proven with this QR code that you are the owner of this physical real world item, and it's anonymous. And for instance, the turnstile reader that I was talking about, it doesn't even have to have any ability to save data. It could be running in read-only mode. And it doesn't need network access, because we didn't even talk about this, but there's no server-side back end to our technology. It's designed to all run on an endpoint device, whether that's a mobile phone or turnstile reader, a door lock, or what have you.
This opens up so much in the usable privacy and security space. My brain is right now, going to so many potential use cases that this can just really help with the friction that we have today, or just unsafe ways of verifying things today, that have potential vulnerabilities in the process. Mm-hmm. So this has been a fascinating discussion, David. I'm so glad you were able to join us. As a call to action to the group we have today, do you want to maybe shout out your website?
Oh, sure. So it's ZeroBiometrics.com. And, we love talking with folks about the technology. Of course, we like talking to potential customers just as much as we like talking to folks that are curious about the technology, or skeptical, or need to understand kind of the security implications. It doesn't have to be a customer engagement. We're really on a mission to not just launch our company and to generate revenue and be commercially successful. We're really on a mission to help the whole industry see that there's a new way of doing biometric authentication that is fundamentally privacy preserving and has significant data protection implications through the use of the zero key concept, or the persistent, having keys that you can delete and then recreate. We're really on a mission to raise awareness about this new way of doing biometrics, because it's high time that we could trust all of the systems that we use to identify us, to keep us safe, to keep us private, to know that we don't have to worry about data breaches or misuse of our information. And in this world where so much financial data is routinely breached and lost, the expansion of traditional biometrics means that it's just a matter of time before biometric data breaches are as common as financial data breaches. And
That's scary.
We can't let that happen. And it will if we continue using the old paradigm. If we insist on using donkey-hauled wagons as our primary method of biometric transport, then we're going to have a lot of biometric data breaches. But it's not necessary.
Well, it's great to know that there's a solution that will bring us into the future where we won't have to think about biometric data breaches happening as often as we've seen financial ones. David, thank you again for joining us. Until next Tuesday, everyone, we'll be back with interesting content and with another great guest. Thanks for joining us this week on Shifting Privacy Left. Make sure to visit our website, shiftingprivacyleft.com, where you can subscribe to updates so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found this episode valuable, go ahead and share it with a friend. And if you're an engineer who cares passionately about privacy, check out Privado, the developer-friendly privacy platform and sponsor of this show. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode. Bye for now.